Today will be Civil Site Design Cogo Points. So for those of you that have sort of touched on these before, we did a webinar back in, I think it was the end of V22, version 22 of Civil Site Design, whereby we unpack these with respect of lot design. I'm going to take a different approach today. So if you've never used these before, great. This is to introduce you to them and see how you can apply them. Very much in the kind of the non-linear theme. I'm just going to move forward a slide. And the reason why I'm saying the non-linear theme is because the session we're going to be running today kind of does get complemented by the 3 webinars that you'll find on our YouTube channel under the webinars section, namely nonlinear design, car park design, part 1 and part 2, which Todd did. Excellent webinars, but you can adopt what we're going to be seeing today into those 2 webinars. Okay, 3 webinars, apologies. So just a very quick introduction. They have been around quite a while, Civil Site Design Cogo Points, predominantly for the survey sort of side of things with respect of getting survey data created as regards to intelligent points in the drawing, stringing those points. That came in V21. And then in V22, we actually incorporated them into the sort of the main part of Civil Site Design, so you could start using them with your designs. Hence why there is a Cogo Points with lot design. I think that's what we've called it. In the sort of archives of our webinar section on our YouTube channel. However, today we're going to be focusing on just talking about their application benefits and how you can use them for design. And as I said, that design that you saw on the first screen is what we're going to be focusing on. The points themselves, I'm just going to talk to these points really quite quickly because a lot of them are going to come out in the wash actually in the presentation. The points themselves are actually created from CAD objects, dynamic blocks with attributes. And for those of you that are using BricsCAD and going, hang on, don't worry, because you can, as you can see on that image there, you can actually use the blocks that we have created. You can't do anything with them whilst there is a dynamic block converter, shall we say, in BricsCAD V25.2. It isn't quite there yet in respect of what it will convert to parametric blocks in BricsCAD. It does some blocks, dynamic blocks for you, but doesn't do all of them, including, unfortunately, a lot of the blocks that I'll be using, which are just standard dynamic blocks with standard parameters added to them, nothing special. But I will touch on just one thing very quickly for the BricsCAD users. We are going to be using something called grips. Now, I don't know why I'm saying that as if you don't know what they are. Everyone knows what grips are in whatever platform you happen to be using Civil Site Design. But specifically in BricsCAD, if you want to get hold of some tools, namely what we call dynamic positioning or editing the Cogo point, the grip that I'll be using throughout the session is only available for the Autodesk users. But if you want to get access to those same tools, you can use something called the quad, which as you can see there is down the bottom right-hand corner of your BricsCAD environment. And if you turn that on, you'll get access to a series of different options and contextual tools related to the object that you're picking. Have a look at the quad, even just in BricsCAD terms, to see how that works. Moving on from that, though, we are going to be looking at how you can use these Cogo points to basically label. You can actually label your surfaces and strings with these. Whilst we have a labeling tool, the good thing about these is that whilst they're actually labeling, you can actually get them to reference other design elements, slopes, height differences, that kind of thing, other Cogo points. The other good thing about these is that you can also lock them in the vertical grading editor. So through the medium of auto profile, I'll be basically saying, look, if there's any Cogo points in this particular pot or group, what I'd like to do is use those Cogo points for the elevation. And essentially you're locking an IP, yes, to the Cogo point, but it means it can't be adjusted. Now, you can also, and this is just as a basic way of using them, assign them as just regular CAD points to your surface. So as you'll see in a second, when I look at the point style, we'll be able to adopt a CAD point onto that point style, and you can add that into Surface Manager as a dynamic point rather than having to linearly create objects to give you elevations. Lastly, and I don't know how much we'll touch on this, we'll display some objects, the Cogos in the VGE, which you can do. Cross-section viewer probably won't do that today. It's not very exciting on the cross-section front, this job, and model viewer, which you're going to see almost straight off the bat. So this is an example of what we're going to be creating today. Simple creation, actually very, very simple management, just within the drawing and through what we call the point group. You're going to be seeing all of this done through the drawing, not through model viewer, but model viewer is just a really great way of explaining what we're going to be doing. So we're going to be basically taking the level at the building edge, and essentially that is going to be the starting point or datum for the level at the front of the parking bay here. We're going to be putting a Cogo point or using a Cogo point, which we've assigned to the building edge with an elevation, and then we're going to be setting 2 further Cogo points from that with slopes, height changes, and then we're going to apply those to the vertical grading editor. So essentially, whilst we could design the edge of this car park through the VGE, this level is actually going to be derived originally from the edge of the building, which is quite cool. Once we've done that, we're then going to jump into how you can assign the Cogo point, and it's not actually the Cogo point which gets assigned to surfaces. There's a CAD point which it brings in. We're going to look at how we can put those into the surface through Surface Manager, again maintaining a dynamic reference to, in this case, the corner of the car park. Then we're going to be focusing on just putting in a simple valley in this area of the car park, where we're going to be using the Cogo points to set the start elevation of this grading string, or valley as we're calling it, and the end. Okay, and because these Cogo points are dynamic, and if you look closely, that's the point I focused on earlier. So the great thing about this is, whilst I'm actually sort of technically labeling the plan up, I'm also creating labels which are going to be assigned to the vertical design and then subsequently the model. Then lastly, as I've sort of pointed out, and which is what I'm going to focus on first, we're going to be using them just as sort of dynamic labels. You can see that I've turned them on in Model Viewer. I'm going to highlight that in a second. But also in the drawing, whilst I'm creating an object which is useful to reference design elements within civil site design, I can just use them for presentation, which is quite smart. So let's get stuck in. I'm going to turn off my camera just because I don't necessarily need to see me all the way through this presentation. This is Model Viewer at a point where I'm going to continue with the design. So all I've done here, as you'll see very shortly, is I've got a model builder model. I've got it display a very simple drainage network in there, just one drainage network with labeling. If you've got any questions about what I'm doing in Model Viewer, by the way, write them down and we'll try and plug them in at the end, because there's a few different things in it, like line marking. It's something we can discuss at the end. It's not sort of consequent. We don't need to see all of this information in here, but it's really, really good for context to help us see how everything's been put together. I've also got some water drops in there, just so we can see what's going on with the current falls, just for your information as much as anything. And just in the material groups, I've put a transparency on the asphalt material groups, as transparency of, I think, about 80%, meaning that I can see the pipe network through there. Okay, so this is what we've got at the moment, and what we're going to do is really just begin to focus on getting this design sort of moved further on down the line, shall we say, by looking at the Cogo points first of all. So let's just minimize, you know what, I might close Model Viewer. One of the downsides of running a webinar is you hide your Windows taskbar. And because I hide my Windows taskbar, I'm then furiously trying to get it to display back up again when I close Model Viewer or minimize Model Viewer. So we'll just close Model Viewer down and reopen it. As I've sort of previously explained, we've got a built model in here. That built model is made up exclusively of grading strings. Okay, doesn't have to have been grading strings, but I've used them for ease. If you go and look at the non-linear design webinar that I did, I promoted them quite heavily actually, in respect of adopting them for design. So all I've done is just combine them together. Nothing more than that. Just combine them together. I've then begun to put Cogo points in the job. So rather than doing this from scratch, I've obviously wanted to make sure we've got something for us to have a look at. So let's have a look at where these Cogo points come from and how they're applied sort of into the drawing. Now, the Site tab is not something you'll see in the AutoCAD BricsCAD CSD Plus version, but you will see the Surfaces tab. I'm probably not going to use the ribbon, mostly because Toolspace has everything I need in it, and for continuity between platforms, it means that you're not going to be going up looking to a different ribbon trying to find different tools. Okay, plus it's a major plug for Toolspace, which I always do, as probably many of you have realized by now watching my webinars. So to get started off with, you have to look at the style that's being applied, the style of this Cogo point, which you can see I'm selecting one of the drawing. So to see the style, you're going to right click on the name of the drawing in CSD Toolspace, Point Styles. Now, again, to save time, I've created some styles already, a couple of styles that we're going to be using in the project. To have a look at this sort of, I guess, from scratch, you'd be coming down to here and clicking Add Style. Most of this sort of gets pre-populated for you, which is nice. And all of what you're seeing is stored in your common folder, meaning that if I go and open another job up, everything in this list is going to be identical. Everything you're seeing is being stored in the common folder, okay? Now, the first thing you need to look at is the block that is being used for the purpose of this point style. Very, very important. So what I'm going to do is click on Save and Close, and I'm going to go Open. And I'm actually going to jump to my common folder. I've got a little shortcut here for the common 10. You'll all have the same, and there's one called Point Styles. And by default, we install one called z.dwg. Now, all I've done is a save as. I called it Z-45, and there's good reason for that. I'm going to open this one up. Would recommend you don't probably have this open whilst you're working with CSD Cogo Points in the background, but as I'm not going to make any changes, I'm okay with doing this. If you're working in, by the way, I am running Civil 3D 2026, and quick disclaimer, I'm also running the Civil Site Design V26 beta, okay? So if you do see anything markedly different, then you'll know why. I'm going to say yes to this. So this is the dynamic block. This is no different to what you would normally create. As far as blocks go with parameters, this is just one of the many that we have in that list that you just saw a second ago. Okay, and this is the one called Z-45. And the reason why it's Z-45 is because on the rotate parameter, I've added the option to rotate this around. Now, if you're in BricsCAD, you can open this. I would not recommend you do anything else with it, though. You are kind of unfortunately restricted to, if you begin to work in this and save this, you're going to override the parameters which you can use in when this is inserted as a block in the drawing. So you're limited to really what you can do. So all I've done here is just rather than go adding lots of parameters, is tweak a parameter and add a 45-degree rotation on there. So I can rotate it at angles of 45 degrees. If you didn't add that in, absolutely fine. Okay, you could use the z.dwg and you'll get exactly what you can see here. In fact, I'm going to just talk to one more thing before we get in. With the difference is that you can't incrementally rotate it. But this is, I don't know why I was just about to close. This is probably the most crucial part, is this element here, which is an attribute. This attribute is what's going to store the elevation and, importantly, display the elevation property of the Cogo point for me. So you could add 3 or 4 attributes, all with different things: point number, maybe the point code, maybe an elevation, maybe an X and a Y. I would recommend you go and open up and have a look at some of the other point styles that are in there to see how those attributes are managed. We've just got one attribute. That's really important, which is why I needed to show you. I'm going to discard the changes. So let's just head back to point styles. And you can see here that when I've created a new style, gone add style, the block that we use, I'll talk to everything else around this in a second, is found by an external drawing file. Select block, we go in and find it, Z-45, and assign that. The first thing you do, as soon as you've selected the block that you want to use, is run point property list. Now, essentially what you can do is tell that attribute to display a property. That could be, as I said, point number, X, Y, elevation. The elevation is what I want it to show. But importantly, when I get it to show the elevation in that block attribute, I want it to use the precision of 2 decimal places, not 3, which is the default, and put a prefix, which is why you can see there's a prefix on there, P space, by the way, which will actually respect that space. And then I want to put a suffix on there of an M for a meter. So the elevation will be whatever number it happens to be, and then I'll assign it these properties. Once you've looked at the point property list, then you move on to the match block attribute. The reason why is because if you do this from scratch and go add style, and you go block, then go match block attribute, this inevitably will be empty. So you need to run it in that order. Once you've created it, it's fine. It's just that first creation. The elevation property is what I want it to display using that attribute. So dead simple. Okay. The only other thing I need to talk to you about is really the default label naming. Point style naming. Can you see how I've got an open square bracket and a closed square bracket? Well, all that means is that when it sees this particular label style, it'll jump into the top of the list, which is incredibly useful, and almost by design, it becomes the default because it's the first one you're offered all the time. I happen to have created 2. okay, and I've put brackets around them so they both get to the top of the list, but because this is the one I want to use more often, I've put a dash in front of it. All right. You will probably find if you open this form up that you'll see one called default with brackets around it. Okay. You can get rid of those brackets. It's just a name, but by putting the brackets on there, as with Windows, generally, Windows Explorer, if you put a bracket on something, that is perceived to be before the first alphabetical name. So it would come before A in the alphabet. The layer which this point will be drawn on can be set by you in the drawing. Okay, there is also, quite conveniently, viewport scaling and viewport rotating, which means it'll maintain its scale based on what annotation you set up in, or annotation scale you set up in the viewport, and rotation, which is really smart. And I'll show you where you can disable that and enable that. But this is just for this point style. Some have it, some don't. Okay, but I want to have it turned on if this style is used. There is a global setting which we need to talk to in 1 second. The only difference between this one and this one is this option. So what I've said is, look, I might want to put a Cogo point in here, but I want to add a CAD point. And that CAD point will use the elevation of whatever Cogo point I add. Meaning that if I put a Cogo point in here of 44, okay, I can go to Surface Manager, tell it to look for any CAD points on that layer, and it will pick them up. What I don't want to do is to have every single one of my Cogo points adding a CAD point into the drawing, and they to be all added in based on a layer. So I've got an exclusive one that just incorporates a CAD point, okay, which is why I don't want that one at the top of the list. I want that one to be at the top of the list, so I'm offered that one most of the time. Right, let me just check and make sure there's nothing else I missed in here. Let me just talk to the viewport scale and rotate. So if these two boxes are checked on, I'm going to click Save, Close, Save and Close. If you go to the General tab and go to Resize Layout Settings, if your Cogo point has had those two boxes checked on, and these two are checked on, the software will automatically rotate and scale your Cogo points for you. Okay, if you uncheck that box, nothing's going to happen. Okay, if you uncheck both those boxes, let me just show you an example of this. So if you have a look at these Cogo points up the north, you can see they're all rotated in plan view. If I head to the viewport, you can see they've all been rotated. Okay, if I just change the scale here and then regen all, you can see they get scaled up, and they'll also get rotated based on those two boxes being checked on the resize form that you saw a minute ago. Okay, so these are really helpful in respect of the labeling. Let's now have a look at creating a Cogo. All right, so I've had a look at, how they're presented in the drawing. Let's create one and edit one. So there's one here already created. The way that I'm going to teach you to create these is just using what we call the manual method. The manual method means you put a Cogo point in and you pretty much just get one Cogo point in the project. We're going to head down to the bottom of tool space, and you'll see that there's this sort of Cogo point icon. You can click on that depending on which version you're running. If you're running V24, I think, you might find that the button is there, these options are there, but it doesn't look like a button. There's no black marker or black arrow. We're going to click on Create Cogo Point. Now, the code is important. All you need to do is put SO or leave it as SO. SO means set out. This is a code which will, think of it as a label for your Cogo point. Any Cogo points that have SO written to them get put in a box, get put in a group. Makes them much easier to manage later on. So what I'll do is I'll leave this as SO for set out. As you'll notice, you don't see SO being displayed on here, so kind of doesn't matter. What I do want to do, though, is set the position of this Cogo point in a way where it is dynamically referencing on plan the grading string for this car park edge here, which is called car park edge west side. And also the elevation needs to reference this Cogo point up here. So let's have a look at how this happens. We click Use Dynamic Position, Set Up Position, and you get this form. So this is like what we call position class. Our development team have set this up, and this appears in a lot of different forms, particularly in Model Viewer, throughout civil site design. All we're going to do is, for the location, if you at some point want to assign this Cogo point to the vertical grading editor, I would recommend you reference a 2D polyline for its position, which conveniently, by the way, if you're seeing lots of green dash polylines, they are the grading strings. I did this in a previous webinar. It's a good way of just highlighting where grading strings actually exist so you can see what's going on. There's a polyline there. What I'd like to do is to set the Cogo Points position up using that polyline. It actually helps with what we call chainage offset calculation later on with picking it up in the vertical grading editor. So I'm going to pick the polyline. There's that green polyline there, and then I'm going to set a chainage, and I'm literally going to snap onto that corner. Now, do bear in mind, if you change this polyline and grip edit it and move it around, it's still going to lock your Cogo point to that chainage, much the same way if it was a vertex. So if you introduce new vertices before and after, you can end up finding your Cogo point will move. Okay, so just a cautionary thing, but as long as you're aware that that will happen, but this is a great way of making sure that it stays put. Now, the elevation, if you know the elevation of this Cogo point, you can actually just type it in. So I did this one. I know it should be 44.93 on the threshold of this building. However, you've got a number of ways that you can assign an elevation. So if you've got a string, relatively local, you could say, hey, I've got a road over here. I'd like to use a code from that particular road string and set the elevation based on that. What I'm going to do is, we'll probably adopt this one fairly often, is just say, grab another Cogo point. So I'm going to say reference Cogo point, pick the picker tool, click the Cogo point itself, press enter. And what I'd like to do is be -2% to the top of curb. So I'm going to pop in -2. Now, the thing about this is that when I want to set this Cogo point up, what I don't want to do is to create a Cogo point for the top of curb and then another one for the bottom, because why would I want to add that to the VG? That's just going to be a mess. So what I'm going to do here is to say, well, look, yeah, okay, so I'd be going -2% across to the top of the curb, but then I need to drop 150 mil. So this Cogo point will now be -2%, then -150 mil, giving me the back of the bay level. We click apply. Now at this point, you need to sort of see what's going on. So we head a bit further down. We can see the default point style is my point style that I created. Just a word of caution, if you rename the point style, okay, just make sure that you come in here and repick it, okay? Design labels, click create point. On the face of it, you kind of look at it and go, nothing's happened. Something has, I can assure you. Close the form. And then we just left click into the drawing. Not always required. And we get this Cogo point. Now, this Cogo point, if we left click on it, will yield grips. Also, it will, if you've put a slope in there, even if you put 0.000001, that little yellow marker appears, which is great because it tells me it's connected to that Cogo. The grips are great because you can use them in BricsCAD. So you remember that 45-degree increment I added? That's why I've added it. You could manually just twist it round if you're not going to adopt that 45-degree version, which you don't have to. But I'm going to pop this here. Obviously, I can flip them. I might flip it, have it there. So BricsCAD users, you can use it. If you were to move this Cogo point and then run the refresh button in tool space, that's basically updating your Cogo points amongst loads of other things it does. But the position is locked to the polyline. So I can't move it unless I want to edit that Cogo point. If you were to delete the Cogo point, it is just like a CAD object. You will lose your Cogo point. Okay, so if I hit delete right now, I've deleted it. It's gone. Okay. There is an undelete option, just so you know. This is where I said I wasn't going to go to the ribbon, but I'm going to. Here, and you can undelete points that have been created, which is quite smart. Okay. Now, I can move it. I can rotate it. Obviously moving it back again. How do I now edit it? Because I've decided to make a change to it. Well, with BricsCAD, you need to go and have a quick look at that slide again, which is to hover over the object, left click, and then left click to edit these to get to access to the tools. For us, in the Autodesk world, we're going to hover over this blue circle. If that blue circle is not there, that means you have a Cogo point, which is not a Cogo point. It's dead. It's not related to civil site design. Okay, so if you see that and there's no circle, you'll find that you've probably done something like move or copy it. Copy is another one. Actually, if I just talk to this one, if I go copy, You notice how there's no blue circle for me to lock into? That's just basically a dead Cogo point. It's a dynamic block, essentially, not related to civil site design anymore. When we hover over this circle, there are some options. If you lock in, you can see set dynamic position. What this does is it takes me straight back to the form that I looked at earlier. Really, really helpful. This means that I can just go straight in and start to tweak the position, lock its position. We're deliberately locking the horizontal position because I want to make sure that, that Cogo point doesn't accidentally get moved away. Okay, I don't want it to be sitting over here and for it to then no longer be referenced. The good thing about this, though, is that what I've got is a nice looking point. The point is how I want it to look. It's labeling at the same time as giving me, at the moment, it's just presenting information to me about the design. I'm not really doing anything else with it. It's not being applied into the design as such. What I need to do is create another Cogo point down here and then assign these to the vertical grading editor. So we're going to head back down to the ribbon. I will talk to something called a point group as well, which is where they're all stashed a little bit later on, but we're going to just go create Cogo point. The manual method, whilst on the face of it, it may seem, well, I've got to do this each time, but do bear in mind that it's dynamically referencing your entire design at the moment. Okay, so if I go and change this, we'll talk to that in a second. I'm going to click on Use Dynamic Position, Set Up Position. You could just, by the way, you could just fix this just, as we'll see short. In fact, I shouldn't steal my own thunder. We'll talk to that option in a second. I'm going to say 2D polyline, pick the polyline, pick the chainage. Being very careful here to snap to the end of this blue polyline, which is going to be part of another grading string. So I'll talk to why we're doing that. The elevation, I want to be referencing 2% from this Cogo point over here. So I basically selected it, press space or enter. You can see it's point number 1 in there. We're going to go grade -2, apply, click create point, and then close the form. And by the way, the reason why I'm getting this odd rotation is just due to the polyline geometry. So it's actually using it as an alignment and rotating it accordingly. So there we are. I'm now 44.65. And we've got this Cogo point here, which I think because I've copied it, let's just go and double check why I'm no longer seeing that -2%. Just make sure it's locked on there. So essentially this Cogo point here is locked to this one. So let's have a quick look at how we can edit this. I decide I want to make a change to this Cogo point. Hover over the circle, set dynamic position. You can see I've just nominated the level. Let's just make this 45.93. Apply. Have a look at these two. These are both sitting at 44 meters. If I hit refresh in tool space, these Cogo points are now updated back to their parent. I'll put this one back to where it should be again. Set dynamic position, 44.93, apply and refresh. So I've got these labels now which are now linked to a completely different part of the design. If I want to now assign these to the vertical grading of this string, which as you can see goes all the way around the edge of this car park, I do it this way. I'm going to open up the vertical grading editor. By the way, if you're using V26 and you have a look at the linear nonlinear design webinar, you'll notice that we've now got some extra options in here for grading strings, which is quite neat. In the vertical grading editor, I've got a number. In fact, I'm going to try and find the right spot. Where are we? We're around here somewhere. There we go. This is where we have at the moment a straight grade. So I could, in theory, add an IP on that particular spot, add an IP onto this particular spot manually, just through the vertical grading editor or the grid editor. There'd be no reason why I couldn't do that, but they're linked to this elevation here, so I want them to stay where they are, okay, or update if the reference changes. What I'm going to do is head to Auto Profile. And for those of you that have used this to match to a surface or constraints or reference point, this is exactly what we're going to be using it for civil points or Cogo points. So we click Reference Civil Points. Now, I would recommend you only use this in ranges where you want it to be used, i.e. where you want it to pick up Cogo points. You could put it all the way through, but why would we do that? That doesn't mean that we can go in and edit, for example, an elevation here, if this is going to wipe it out and say, don't care what the design is, just use Cogo points. So I know that this area is from chainage about 42 to chainage 52. Look for any Cogo points, and this is where we'll look at the point group in a minute, that have a description called SO. Conveniently ours do. Then I want it to, you can see this graphic's probably the most helpful, as it is looking for civil points, I do not want it to pick up civil points that are 1,000 meters away. I only want it to look 100 mil left and right of the center line, just to pick up local Cogo points, certainly not that one there. If we click OK, and then let's click Calculate Profile, we're looking for this change here. Done. Now, if I then decide that I'm going to make a change to this Cogo point, if I click Close, if I then decide to move this Cogo point and these two adjust, you can either come back into Auto Profile and click Calculate or click Refresh. Anything in Auto Profile is automatically updated that way. So just applying those in the drawing, for starters, just as dynamic labels, or then referencing other Cogo points and then assigning them to strings is very, very beneficial. One thing I didn't show you was that in the options here for set dynamic position, you can just say reference surface. So if you've got a built model that you've created, or for that matter, if it happens to be the, I don't know, the NS, you could just go through and use these just to label up different spots on your design. We're going to use these now to, rather than apply them along the vertical design of a string, we're going to use them to assign the elevation on the top of this pit to give me a low point. Because at the moment, the only way that you could do this is to literally type the word point, click the point, and give it an elevation of your choice. Well, actually, I want to do that, but what I want to do is to make sure that that CAD point is always -1% from the furthest point of this car park, meaning that I'm never going to be flatter than I should be. So to do this, we're going to head down to the same tool we've used before, Create Cogo Point. We're going to leave it as SO, use dynamic position, set up position. Now this time I'm not linking it to a string. So I'm not going to use the polyline option. I'm just going to literally nominate a spot. I'll use the insertion point there of this block. There we go. I could nominate the elevation if I want to, but what I'm going to do is make sure I'm referencing a Cogo, entirely optional. Click that Cogo down the bottom, press enter, and I want to be -1%. My days back in the UK doing lots of this type of car park design, having these things linked up like this would have been invaluable, certainly when it comes to your worst grade slope or the flattest part of the car park. We're going to apply this. What we're not going to do is to use the design label option. We're going to use the one that's called design label with point. I want to make sure I get a CAD point, so I'm going to click Create Point, close the form, and then left click. What you'll notice is that there's now a CAD point in there, which has been added. If I do DDP type, I'm going to hang around just on that. So for those of you that don't use the ribbon, you want to have a look at how this point has been created. It's just using your CAD style. If you have a look at the point itself, we'll go to the properties, you can see it's gone into the layer, which is part of the point style, but then it's been assigned the elevation. What I want to do is to add that to this built model. And for those of you that haven't watched the previous webinars we've done most recently, what you may not know is that in Surface Manager, on a built model, you can assign CAD objects. Okay, so just so we're clear here, I'm going to get rid of that, hit the first column, A1 as it were, and hit the delete key. If you've got CAD objects, 3D polylines, 3D faces, and you want to add those to one of your dynamic built models, you can. So I'm going to click the only layer which exists in the drawing with points on it, which is that one there, click Add, click Build, and I've now got myself a low point. But crucially, this low point here is connected to that corner of the car park, not me just randomly putting in a point with an elevation. Okay, so it's a really good way of ensuring that you get your CAD point added. If you then decide, well, actually, oh, do you know what? I don't want that that point to be using that particular style, that Cogo point. Just using the grips again, you've got the same tools in BricsCAD via the quad. Instead of using set dynamic position, you can go edit Cogo point. You can actually do a few things with this. Can be a little bit overwhelming, I think, for users seeing this the first time round. You're thinking, well, there's a lot going on here. Do I need to know this? Setup position sends you to the dynamic positioning. One thing that you can do in here is if you decide that the code needs to be something else, let's just say it happens to be very close to a string, and you don't want it going into the point group beginning with SO or using SO, then you can just change it to something else, completely random if you want to. I've decided I don't want to use this point style with the block in it, with the point. Click this little button down here, which is the change style button. I want to replace the style with design labels. Apply. Yep. Now, you'll need to delete the CAD point, okay? But fortunately, it doesn't come back again. So if I go back to Surface Manager now, because I've changed the style, let's go build. You see it's gone. Let's just pop that back in again, just to sort of show you the process. Hover, edit Cogo, replace style. Yes, I want to replace the style, and I want it to be design with point. Apply. Yep. There we go. Back in again. Let's head back to Surface Manager. Right click. And we'll just click build. Don't need to do anything. The layer still exists there. The third part of this sequence is to introduce a valley. Now, to be honest with you, if you wanted to, you could very simply just create this grading string and just assign it the elevation manually. But whilst we're here, we might as well look at how we can assign the elevations from the Cogos. So I've got a Cogo point here. I've also got a Cogo point here. I'm missing one in that bottom right-hand corner. I was loath to delete this one and show you how to put it in, but it's kind of just repeating the same thing. Let's go create Cogo, use dynamic position, setup, reference polyline. You really are very much building the project and building the design using this methodology. It's not kind of slapdash chucking in sort of labeling. It's a very methodical process, but very, very neat because everything's linked. So I want the elevation to be a Cogo point from this one here, -1%. Remember to check the style. You can always change it, but I don't want to be using. By the way, if you open this form up, what you'll find is that it just remembers the last point that you used. So if you do open it up, it just goes, oh, so you used the one with the point last time. You want to use it again. So that's why it's always worth checking. Create point, close, and I'm just going to left click into the drawing. And then because this is my nice, neat dynamic block, just give that a squiz around there. There we go. What I'm also going to do is very quickly assign that to the vertical design, because I've just realized there is no way it will know it needs to use it. So you can see where I've used it elsewhere. I've actually removed, let's see what level we've got here. So let's just get rid of that one down the bottom. So I know at roughly change 73-ish to 74 to add a Cogo in there. Reference civil points, 73 to 74. If it sees any Cogo points with SO, search 100 mil left and right, okay, and calculate. There you go, it's gone back in. I mean, look, what you can do is go auto profile, delete the entries, click calculate, which acknowledges that you've calculated nothing, but it will remove those entries and close. And basically at any point you can say, well, actually now I want to go in and manually override this design and no longer have those IPs essentially being locked by the Cogo. Let's have a quick look at the valley that we're going to be putting in here. Oh, one thing I meant to do, as you can see, I've got a water drop here. I'm just going to just see if by updating my water, there we go. If you didn't know this, if you right click on a surface in tool space, I'm showing you kind of the old school method, which is to right click in here rather than in the drawing. Right click on your surface, go add water drop. See, it's interesting how that one is actually flicking around the corner, but anyway, there we go. And we might just come down here. See how that one's going off in all sorts of merry ways there to the north. We can then update those to see the resulting change to the surface. So I've created a grading string. Now this grading string is just using a polyline, which you can see here, but crucially the polyline starts exactly on top of where that Cogo point starts. Otherwise you will not be able to read it in auto profile, okay? Same goes with this one down here. I've made sure that that polyline is exactly snapping to the point where the Cogo is. Otherwise, it won't find it. We've got the option on auto profile. Excuse me. We have the option in auto profile to search left and right, but not back and forth. Okay. So if this polyline is slightly ahead of that Cogo point, you won't see it. So let's have a look at how we can set this up. We'll open up the valley. Interesting way to say that. Vertical grading editor. You can see I've got no spacings. I've actually set this grading string up with a spacing value of like 1,000. Okay. I don't need to be picking up intermediate points. Auto profile, And again, I'm going to run this twice. I'm not going to just go all the way through because it prevents me from making edits. So I'm going to say from 0 to 1 meter. Use the point group SO. Search left and right. Remember, not back and forth. Click OK. And we'll go calculate profile. Dun, dun, dun. That was super unexciting. Let's just check if I just picked the right one. No, I didn't. There we go. And then we'll close this. In fact, no, we'll do the same with the other end. So we'll go reference civil point, and we'll say from about chainage, well, look, 15 meters is reasonable, to the end. SO, search 100 mil left and right. Okay, calculate profile. Now, importantly, if we go close, and then close this down, if I then go to my built model, edit model, include the valley, and then build. I know why it's not doing anything. I'm going to talk to this now. I'm going to go close, click OK. The reason, there's some interesting graphical things going on there. The reason why it's not quite picked it up is to do with how we register Cogo points at the start and the end of your alignment. And this is a touch point that I needed to make. It's important that if you assign something to the very start and the very end, as far as Cogo points go, what you'll find is that when you click on that Cogo point at the start, the chainage will have been nudged forward by 2 mil. And that was to do with something that was happening with the lock grading, whereby if you had a loop, the software couldn't quite pick up the start and the end and assign it to one Cogo point. So we've nudged it forward. So I would suggest if you come in here, you put 0 and press enter, and you'll know you've not got it because the text will be empty in here. Okay, click on close, click on the end IP. I can see what the chainage should be, 15.605. And obviously that reduced it by a very tiny amount, and then click on close. Close that down, and I'm going to right click on my model in Model Builder and go rebuild, which has then incorporated it into the design. Okay, so very, very important. It may seem like something's going wrong. It's not. It's deliberately intended to ensure that we can capture Cogo points on closed polyline shapes in that manner. If I then right click on CSD surfaces, update water drops, and get absolutely nothing happen, which was super unexciting, even though we know the, oh, there we go. I don't think I clicked on it properly. There we go. I think my mouse thought it was in some kind of pan mode. The water drops are now registering that, yes, I've got that valley, and yes, I'm getting the surface water tracking on its merry way down to the south of that particular car park. All right. We're actually well ahead. For once, I'm well ahead of time. So I'm actually going to show you a couple more options. We're going to drop a Cogo point in here. Same process. It's just rinse and repeat, really. Then we'll talk to how we can just assign them to, in fact, we'll do that first. We'll cover this last point off first, but sort of part 4 in my notes. I've got a grading string here, which you can see is actually separate. I've done it as a different color, so this polyline, so you can actually see what's what here. What I'd like to do is I've already done the vertical design. Okay, so if I open up the vertical grading editor here, you can see that I've assigned IPs, okay, and set up the vertical design as I want to. What I want to do, though, is use those Cogo points to list the elevations. Now, you can do this through our CSD labels, but as we're already in this world, we might as well continue with the CSD Cogo points. And then, obviously, because of that, we can then harness their elevations and connect them with respect to things like other pits and other strings, or other surface levels and other strings. So we're going to head to a slightly different option this time. So you could go create Cogo point. I will just mention that you can do it manually. Specify the location onto the polyline there if it happens to be one, which I'm expecting there will be, and then just say reference the string centerline level. Done. However, there is a slightly quicker way of doing this, which is create Cogo by reference. I know it would be tempting to go for create by polyline. That was very much intended for lot design. And I wouldn't suggest that you would use it for this type of sort of linear design on this car park. You'll see why as well. Create by reference has got some extra bells and whistles. Create by reference. So what I want to do is, use SO. That's perfectly fine. I don't mind. I'm going to set up the dynamic position. What I'm going to do is tell it to use the the alignment. This is really important. There's a grading string there. The grading string uses a polyline. The polyline, in actual fact, is a civil site design alignment. If I use an alignment, I can use what we call a section list. So when you do your cross-section plotting, you pick a section list and you can say, look, I want cross-sections here, 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 and here, and you can edit it. Well, the same applies for the Cogo points on this alignment. So as long as you pick alignment and then go and pick that alignment, which we're going to do now, which is car park south, and then I want to basically use the elevations of that. GR car park edge south, car park edge south. Don't want to do anything with the elevations. I want them to read the vertical design, apply. All I then do is assign the style that I want to use. In this case, it's going to be design labels. Don't worry about code sets, by the way. I know that's in there, but having tracked through this now for a number of quite a long amount of time, code set tables don't really get involved with any of what we're doing. Then you can say how often you want to Cogo, by chainage, by single chainage, by sections. However, because we've picked the alignment in the horizontal option, if you didn't pick it, you pick polyline, you won't see all this. What I'd like to do is say, look, yeah, I might have the horizontal geometry. So I'm going to go 10 meters horizontal geometry only, but I want to see what that looks like. So I'm going to click the edit chainage list. Go and find that list. So you'll be familiar with these from cross-section plotting. You can see that it's picked up the start point, the secant, which is basically the midpoint of that curve down here, the curve to tangent, which is the end, the TP, then all the horizontal IPs. What I've tried to do here is, by the way, is make sure, I've done a bit of tweaking here, as you can see. I've put the tangent spacing to 0, so it doesn't pick up intermediate points, don't want those. You could if you wanted to, and I've put the major and minor label spacing down to up to 1,000. So again, it doesn't pick up any extra spots, but you could do if you wanted to. If you wanted a Cogo every 5 meters, you could add those in. Now, just a caveat with this, the horizontal IP will generally only get picked up if you have a change of direction on the alignment. So what I found is that if you have IPs dotted along this polyline or vertices, inevitably they're not going to get picked up. They only get picked up when you have a change of direction. Same goes with vertical IPs as well. But it's a good starting point if it saves you a bit of time. All I'm going to do is click OK. So I haven't actually done anything on these other, oh, well, yes, horizontal is, they're all checked on. Okay, but I've unchecked secant, don't want the middle. Click OK. All you do is once you've picked that list, click Add, making sure you've got the right style and click Create Points. And then yes, because they're referencing the alignment for their position, one thing I do need to do, folks, is this. I need to move them around, need to tweak them. I need to move them and make sure that they look presentable. Because they're dynamic blocks, though, there is such a sort of an ease about this, just being able to move them, rotate them around, set them up how you want them. Now, because they are referencing the vertical design, I'm not going to go and apply them to the vertical design in auto profile. That would be absurd. But what I can now do is use them to reference and set maybe the level of this top of this pit if we wanted to. But I'm not actually going to go there. I don't think we need to. I think we've kind of covered it. And usually we are at the point where I'm nearly pretty much finished. I guess the point of, no pun intended, by the way, I knew I was going to say that at some point in this webinar, was that we're looking at these as a way of being able to label. You don't have to use them to label if you do not want to. Okay, if you're using feature lines and you're using just your standard Civil 3D labeling or whatever labeling it happens to be, you can still use those if you want to. But the great thing is that if you get a style which works, you can then basically have the label adopt intelligent information about your design. You can also assign that information to your vertical design and through your strings and to your surface models, crucially, okay? And also then use them as a kind of just bookending really here to then label up your current strings using that vertical design. So there's kind of 3 focal areas: labeling, using them application to strings, and application to surfaces. Todd, I might, you're probably like, why is he finishing so early? But I just want to make sure we've got any potential opportunity for questions.
We do have a couple of questions.
Oh, okay.
One of them is probably just a request for improvement. So we can certainly forward that on to our development team, but it was just about adding some of the analysis as the toggle option for surface display. So we can forward that on to our development team. But the two questions that I thought were important to put in that might be worth getting you to answer live was the one where you were doing the change of the chainages at the very beginning by the 2 millimeters. The question is, if you change those and then run rebuild and recalculate, and the auto profile kicks in, will you have to re-edit those IP positions?
100% yes. Yeah, and I guess it's a good reiteration. If I run either calculate profile, which I should have just pressed, or refresh, you will notice that they will tweak. Okay. Your best option is I guess you could be going, well, what's the point? I might as well just manually edit both of those. You will still get the Cogo point to the right elevation. Don't forget, it's the fact that there's no chainage. And because there's no chainage, technically, there's no line work in here for it to draw, which is why it won't model. All right. If I had spacings of every 2-3 meters, it probably wouldn't have been a problem, but I've decided to not have any significant spacing. So yes, you would need to go into this auto profile entry. I've just left clicked near that IP 0, click near the other end. Don't even have to change anything. 15.605 and press enter.
The follow-up question to that was, if you added in a sample point at that 0.02, would that pick it up and therefore fix it for you?
Why don't we try it?
Potentially.
Yeah. Well, what we'll do is go right-click, insert sections. There's a V26 thing you can do this now. Otherwise, you're going to go up to the roads tab. For those of you that aren't, well, all of you who are not on V26, add extra sections. Click near your grading string. Make sure you've got GR Valley. We'll put 0.002. Then we'll go refresh down the bottom. And then we'll go OK. And I'll probably just I could have introduced that into the VG. There's probably a little point vertical grading editor. And we'll go refresh. No, I think we're going to end up with the same issue. Let me just turn that on in the VGE. I think because it's such a short distance, I don't think
2 millimeters is probably too tight.
It is too small. Yeah, I expect it will be. Let's just open that up. Vertical grading. Oh, there you go.
Oh, okay. There you go. There's a fix.
There is a fix. Sections are
you could do the same thing at the very end as well.
100%.
So that could cover you to fix it up. Another one I had a thought on, Jonathan, and I might be steering you down a rabbit hole here.
Dark path, yes.
Could you use the chainage reference field in the point property and set it to 0?
You
know how you can set you can tell it to pull the chainage property off the Cogo Point? Wonder if that would fix it for you. But then you'd have to know the end chainage, which would be really hard. You fix one end but not the other. So maybe that's I said dark path. Maybe we'll just ignore that statement. So that's cool.
I think the easiest option is to just look, let's fix that end up. There we go. Your best bet is just knock those extra sections in and through the medium of insert sections.
Cool. Another question was, and this is back towards when you were doing that point that you threw in for the pit. So I think it's to the north of where you are at the moment. Yeah, there. So the question was about adding the points into the surface model or the built model. Does that adjust the subgrade to match, was the question.
No.
And the answer is no. I just wanted to answer it live. Because...
Oh, sorry.
No. I'm happy for you to answer it. I was just thought it'd be benefit for everybody. So when Jonathan did that, he actually modified the terrain model, which was a result of the model, but not actually modified the model. So you would have to potentially make some edits to your subgrade model. Or alternatively, you'd have to put in a string in there, maybe some sort of grading to represent that low point or something like that. But yeah, if you're modifying just the surface, you're only going to change the surface, not the subgrade that comes from the model.
Indeed. Yeah. I was careful not to touch on subgrade just yet. I think that's now we've kind of covered off. This is what we call like a design aid in training. And I think this was kind of that last final part of design aids, which we can now reference back to. So when it comes to talking about something more complex, like, yes, how would you manage the subgrade definition or subgrade surface from Subgrade Model Manager? And this is actually quite a complicated job to do that, because if you've got a slab through here, you can actually assign to the back of the curb, you could actually assign a code that's a millimeter away with 150 mil of concrete, and then put 150 mil of concrete with 0 width on the edge of this slab. And I actually get it, and I did try this. You actually get this sort of slab surface being projected around the back. That works great, but when you try and introduce something on the surface, which is just literally a point, there's nothing underneath it. There's no subgrade defined on that point. So you'd have to, yeah, as Todd's kind of alluded to, you end up creating like potentially a rectangular grading stream that just has a zero width, 150 mil or whatever it happens to be, subgrade for it to kind of model to, which is a bit
it
messy,
essentially
but
creates a point inside the subgrade model to
yes.
triangulate to. So yeah. Cool. There's another question here about creating set out tables for the Cogo points. So
that's a really good point. Look, yeah, let me just mention
which I assume is just the point table you could create from the
point group. Yeah, if
point
we
group.
go point groups here, if we head, this is where all your points live. So just in case you want to know where they are, if I just skip through any one of these, you can see we get a little auto zoom. If you wanted to do something with those Cogo points, you can highlight them and then use a various number of options underneath, edit dynamic position, replace the style. Just bear in mind, by the way, when you do replace the style, and I should have probably covered this when I spoke to the pit Cogo point, you are going to reset the style of the dynamic block. So if I did go and replace the style of all of these Kogos up here to use a different Cogo point style, the dynamic block will revert back to type and I'll have to rotate them. But if that's the worst thing you have to do, then so be it. But yeah, we can then export PNZD file. By the way, the way that this works, very simple, folks, is that it looks for any code that is equal to SO uppercase. If you want to just ensure that you always make sure you capture SO lowercase, just put SO asterisk. Like that, just in case you happen to punch in SO yourself manually, it won't get listed in here because you haven't got a case sensitive option. Let's just go CAD table. There's a whole ton of options in here. We'll pop this over here.
Yes, that would probably fantastic. I was going to say, it comes down to what you want to do with the set out table if you wanted to do it in the draw.
That's the pitch schedule. Hang on, just 1 second.
Yeah,
sorry, go on. That didn't work, so I'm just going to go back in and do it again.
Yeah, you could do exactly what Jonathan's doing there, where you pump out the CAD table, or you could pump out the CSV file and bring it into Excel, depending on what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Although I'm not sure. Bear in mind, everybody, this is a beta, so there may be something that's not working.
Great disclaimer, here. Todd. Yeah. Not 100% sure, and this is not something I've spent a whole heap of time doing. It is not normal behavior. No.
So yeah, but yes, it is possible. So you just can take a collection of points out of a point group and pump it out into a table in the drawing. The other question, I was a bit confused, so maybe I need the person to just clarify, but it was about it can be a bit painful to add them all in on a number of lots. I'm not sure what that's related to. So look, that could expand that. But I think that might be related to the create Kogos by polyline, I suspect.
Yeah, I would agree. I think look, even now you might be looking, it's a time-consuming process, but at the end of the day, if you're labeling and creating a dynamic reference, I'm not having to do anything to that point now. Its level will basically be worked off this point here. So yes, it's a slower process than just.
Actually, I think it's related to the sampling. The extra sampling, because there's a second question came back in. Yes, it is a bit painful, but it's unfortunately it's the price you pay for having the dynamics. I think it's about the insert extra sections to cover that 2 millimeter thing.
Indeed.
Yeah. And the last one was what happens if you copy a dynamic block out of to a separate drawing?
Yeah, I mean, if I copy that, it's just going to be if I just take it into here.
It'll just be a dynamic block. It won't
dynamic
be a
block.
CSD.
That's all it is. Yeah, it's not connected back to Civil Site Design at all. Much the same way as what we did when we just copied it in the drawing. It loses that connectivity back to Civil Site Design as soon as I copy it. And essentially it just becomes a dynamic block in the drawing.
Do you bring up the VGE for, say, that valley, or maybe not the valley, maybe one of them has got the Cogo points along it that you use to design it? I can't remember which, but that one there. If you actually go to the survey tab up the top.
This is one thing I sort of highlighted I might mention.
Yeah. So if you go SO for that, and then you say show the points, and you say search within a certain distance, because you can limit it if the thing's got loops and stuff, it'll actually show you all those points from your drafting and from your model actually in the VGE. So you can get an appreciation for when you get the points in the right spot.
And let me just briefly mention how I did it in model view. I did say at the end there was lots of things that I've sort of shown which haven't. By the way, these will turn up. These don't stick if you close the
Yeah, you
VG
have to
down
turn
and
it on each
reopen.
time, so
Yeah,
it's only really a design tool at this point. But it just thought I thought it might be something useful that people might want to use.
and again in the VG in model viewer, this is one way of actually getting level information shown in here, other than using just standard labels. Can be a really helpful way of just labeling up the design. As you can see at the back here, look, these are all those labels I just strung off the rotor off that car park center line there. Can be a really neat way of just being able to see using the survey tab any points with SO, have a play with the label style, the point size, showing labels, show points, show elevation. You can also show point number, less relevant, I would say here. Really neat way of just being able to see those in this environment, including the VG. Thanks for that, Todd. That was a great little reminder to plug that one in.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. That was a very informative session. So if people haven't really played with the Cogo Points, thinking that they are really more just a surveying related tool is actually probably, hopefully Jonathan has shown you that they are not. They are actually a multifaceted tool. They are really a dynamic element that you can use for survey, definitely, but also from a design perspective. So yeah, I encourage everyone to have a muck around with them and to try and utilize them, particularly that dynamic referencing stuff where you can link it to polylines and alignments and set levels from one point to another and so forth like that. It's really useful from a design perspective. I wish I had some of this stuff back when I was doing this in anger. Jonathan,
Thanks.
thank you very much.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks everyone for your attendance. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a good day.